Hi, hey, I'm Morgan, and today I'm here to bring you my May wrap-up. So May was a much better reading month than I anticipated. I read 7 books in the month of May. It's pretty exciting. 2 were graphic novels, 1 was a middle grade book, and 1 was like a children's / picture book. But you know what? I'm counting literally all of them. So judge me. The first book that I read this month was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I'm lending it to my sister right now, so just put the cover right here. I gave Coraline 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is normal for what I usually give middle grade books. It was really good, just nothing too crazy. It follows our main character Coraline, who is not very thrilled with her average life, and she moves to this new home with her mom and her dad, who are way too busy for her and don't really find the time to be the parents that she wants them to be. And she finds this little door in her house that takes her to another world, and that is where her other mother lives, and there's this whole other life that is way more fantastic than the life that she is regularly living. But things aren't always what they seem, and Coraline has to realize that she has to fight to keep her real life, because that's the one that she actually wants. I think I enjoyed the movie adaptation more than this. And then this month I read Stuff I've Been Feeling Lately by Alicia. I also gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is a poetry collection that is split into 2 parts. The first part are just the poems, and then the second part are the remixes, which are the same poems but done with blackout poetry. I thought it was a really interesting premise, but at the end of the day, this poetry collection fell a little flat for me. I am pretty picky when it comes to my poetry though, so that might just be me. I think that there were a lot of poems in here that stuck out to me and resonated with me really well, but it's not the best poetry collection that I've read. I found it to be a bit wordy, but overall it was still really fun. Then this month I started a graphic novel series, and that is the Scott Pilgrim series. So I read Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, both by Bryan Lee O'Malley. Scott Pilgrim series takes place in Canada, and it follows our main character Scott Pilgrim, who plays in a band called Sex Bob-ombs, and he's, you know, living a pretty mundane life, nothing too exciting. He's dating a high school girl, and he thinks that's really exciting. He's trying to get over his really big ex, and then in comes Ramona Flowers, and she is everything that he has ever wanted in a person. He starts to fall in love with her at a very rapid rate, but he realizes that in order to keep Ramona in his life and to date her, he has to defeat her 7 evil ex-boyfriends. And yeah, I really enjoyed these. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is one of my favorite movies, so I'm excited to be diving into these graphic novels. I gave both of these 4 out of 5 stars, which is what I normally give graphic novels, and I'm really excited to continue on with this series. And then I read Crank by Ellen Hopkins. This is the first book in the Crank trilogy. Ellen Hopkins is one of those authors that I've read for a really long time, and I really enjoy her books. This is the 2nd or 3rd time that I'm reading this. All of Ellen Hopkins' books are really interesting as well, because they're all told through verse poetry, but they tell a story, so it's not like a collection of poems. Crank follows our main character Christina, who spends the summer not in her regular home of Reno, Nevada, but in Albuquerque, New Mexico with her dad. Her dad and her don't really have the best relationship, and she decides to go stay there. In that span of time, she meets a boy, falls in love with that boy, and also becomes familiar with crank or meth, whatever you want to call it. This is the tumultuous story of Christina's struggle with addiction and going back home and dealing with finding the drug there and living this double life that she didn't know she was capable of having. I enjoyed this book. It's just, I don't know if it's just these ones or if it's all Ellen Hopkins. I haven't read Ellen Hopkins in a really long time where I enjoy them, but they always feel a little underwhelming. And this book does have a trigger for drug abuse as well as sexual assault, so if that's something that you're sensitive to, I would definitely be wary picking this one up. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't what I remembered it, but obviously I haven't read this since I was maybe 13, so I think that's just general consensus, is that my reading tastes definitely change in that time. But I am going to reread the second book in this and then read the closer to the trilogy and finally have wrapped up this trilogy. And then I also picked up Neil Gaiman's retelling of Hansel and Gretel with illustrations by Lorenzo Mattotti. I read this in one sitting at the book loft, so I don't have a copy of the book, but I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, which is what I typically give like children's books as well as graphic novels. It didn't have that much substance for me to be like, this is a 5-star read, but it was still very enjoyable. This is a retelling of the Brothers Grimm's edition of Hansel and Gretel, so a retelling of a retelling kind of, but I still really enjoyed it. The illustrations were really dark, really spooky, and Neil Gaiman's storytelling way was very, very interesting. All in all, I really enjoyed it, and I'll probably read more Neil Gaiman eventually. And then the final book I picked up this month was Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander by J.K. Rowling.